Tolerance enshrined in international instruments. Intolerance has left its negative traces throughout the history of civilization. The idea of tolerance historically matured and developed in Europe, in the 16th and 17th centuries. Destructive religious wars and constant social upheavals led the Europeans of that time to believe that the disruption of religious unity was inevitable. It is necessary to be tolerant towards other religions to establish public order. The leading thinkers of that time, John Locke, Voltaire and others, dedicated whole works to the idea of tolerance. In their works, they regarded tolerance a human virtue. This virtue includes the tolerance towards differences between the people, the ability to live without disturbing the others, the ability to have rights and freedoms without violating the rights and freedoms of others. Right from the beginning, tolerance was regarded as a philosophy of diversity and endurance of humankind. Any society without ethnic, social, and cultural homogeneity needs tolerance. Consequently, a tolerant attitude towards social and cultural differences, towards the opinions, beliefs, and behaviors of others is one of the fundamental principles of world civilization. In addition to a philosophic understanding of tolerance and the need for it, one of the urgent challenges for humanity is to turn it into a way of thinking for every individual, social group, ethnic group, and political force. The awareness of this challenge led to the fact that the idea of tolerance penetrated into the area of international law and was enshrined in international instruments. This penetration is the first stage in the process of replacing the culture of war and intolerance with a culture of peace and tolerance. The first steps toward the inclusion of the idea of tolerance in international legal instruments were already taken at the end of the 19th century. Therefore, the 1894 Geneva Convention required to show respect for every soldier's person and to recognize the neutrality of medical personnel in times of war. This idea culminated in the development of rules for treating prisoners of war and the establishment of the International Committee of Red Cross. The League of Nations also became involved in establishing ideas of tolerance. In 1926, the League passed a document proclaiming slavery to be illegal. The idea of tolerance became urgent immediately after the end of the Second World War, and it prompted a need for a new culture of politics, philosophy, and functioning. The UN and its other organizations put the universal ideas, including tolerance, at the basis of their activities. The seemingly utopian ideas of legal equality, respect for human rights, and tolerance gradually established them in the law and started to be applied in practice. The UN Charter sets forth the determination of the United Nations to keep the future generations away from the destruction of wars, to re-establish the faith in the fundamental human rights, the dignity and value of an individual, to practice tolerance and to live together in peace as good neighbors. The preamble of the UNESCO Charter adopted in 1945 endorses that the world must be based on intellectual and moral accord between people. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights, 1948, proclaims, "Every individual has the right to the freedom of thought, conscience, religion, and convictions and the right to express them freely." According to the Declaration, education must be aimed at full development of a person and at strengthening the respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms. It must foster mutual understanding, tolerance and friendship between nations and racial or religious groups. In addition to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, numerous other well-known international agreements on human rights have been adopted in the past few years. They either set forth the civil, political, economic, social, and cultural rights of an individual or are aimed at prohibiting or eliminating intolerance and various manifestations of discrimination. If we take into consideration that more than half a century has elapsed since the Second World War and no disaster of such nature and proportions has taken place ever since, we can say that this is the result of the influence of the international agreements mentioned above. Nevertheless, the situation is not satisfactory. Despite all the efforts, intolerance and discrimination continue to produce destructive results. Both in the Cold War years and after, there have been social, religious, cultural, and inter-civilization confrontations as well as conflicts in the world. They have often turned into armed conflicts. Intolerance, in its numerous manifestations, continues to remain a threat to peace, democracy, and human rights. National and international relations continue to remain an obstacle for development. The preamble of the Charter of the United Nations endorses a provision, which reflects the determination of member states to practice tolerance and to live together in peace as good neighbors. The inclusion of this provision in the Charter is not accidental. After the experience of the extreme nationalism of the 19th century and the horrors of the Second World War, the prevention of intolerance, discrimination, and racism was seen as essential for maintaining peace. It became the next stage of development of human rights. A new framework for international cooperation was established. Recognition of the principle of tolerance was of paramount importance for the effective protection of human rights and fundamental freedoms. Learning how to live constructively in a diverse world became vital, and working to resolve conflict through mutual agreement became crucial. Hence, the search for peace through education in accordance with the principles set forth in the UN Charter began.